morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Business Morning. It's going to be about 55 minutes of relevant and current business talks. That's what we do here. I'm Amy John Mekwa, and we start as usual from the global space, where oil prices jumped more than 1% on Wednesday after reports that Israel is preparing a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, and that's raising fears that a conflict could upset supply availability in the key Middle East producing region. And so we see for this morning, it's Brent futures for July that's on sale at this time. It's gained 86 cents. That's about 1.32% to $66.24 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures for July also climbed 90 cents. That's about 1.45% to $62.93 a barrel. New intelligence obtained by the United States suggests that Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, and this citing multiple U.S. officials that are familiar with the matter. It was not clear whether Israeli leaders have made any move towards this or any decision towards this. Now, U.S. crude futures, which rose by more than $2 a barrel, while Brent rose by $1 because of this news. Iran is the third largest producer among members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. An Israeli attack could upset flows from the country. There are also concerns that Iran could retaliate by blocking oil tanker flows from the Strait of Hormuz checkpoint in the Gulf, through which Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates export crude oil and fuel. And of course, this is a major threat to supply and could raise prices further, which on the Nigerian side would increase revenue of the government if it's sustained, but will also increase pump price on the other hand. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria yesterday it was decision day, and the committee, the MPC, decided to maintain the monetary policy rate at 27.5%. The decision was reached during the meeting as part of ongoing efforts to stabilize the economy and manage inflation in the country.
If you look at the oil sector itself, you find that the importation had gone down with the Dangote Refinery and all the other refineries coming up. The demand obviously will go down. The gas exports have, been on an upward trajectory. Now that we have a competitive currency, and it's something that you will hear me talk about over and over and over again. Our currency now is more competitive. So this should encourage exports. And indeed, for us as Nigeria and Nigerian businessmen, the opportunity to extend that dragnet into our sub-region is also an enormous opportunity now that we have such a competitive currency.
And yes, that was part of the decision made at the MPC yesterday. Now let's give you a bigger picture of the decisions made and why the MPC reached that decision.
In a landmark 300th meeting, Nigeria's central bank has once again set the course for the nation's economic, with inflation easing in April, coming in at 23.71%, and food inflation at 21.26%. Due to the rebased data and necessity for clarity, it was a unanimous decision to retain all parameters, with MPR at 27.50%. Governor Olayemi Cardoso highlights key reasons for this.
The MPC noted the relative improvements in some key macroeconomic indicators, which are expected to support the overall moderation in prices in the near to medium term. These include the progressive narrowing of the gap between the Nigeria Foreign Exchange Market, NIFM, and Bureau de Change, BDC windows. The positive balance of payments position and easing price of PMS.
While the committee has its attention on global and local factors, economists are concerned about the methodology for evaluating inflation data, which forms the basis for decisions.
The governor said that when you compare this year inflation with last year inflation, it reduced to about 23%. Actually, inflation did not reduce according to the National Bureau of Statistics. It's not reduction that they are talking about. They are talking about a change in base year. It was over 30% based on the base year we were using last year. Now, econometricians will be very careful to call that reduction and to even make policy. So one thing I'm happy with is that we didn't use that figure to make decisions.
But this is not to say Nigeria is insulated from global happenings. With the emergence of trade wars and subsequent pauses, the central bank governor also highlighted the impact of tariffs on the Nigerian economy. But how did the economy manage?
Despite what happened with the trade tariffs and all of the disruptions we saw back in April, that the Nigerian economy seems to have weathered the storm, in a very nice way. Because if the CBN did not come into the market to provide the liquidity, you probably will see a lot more exits.
As Nigeria navigates these economic challenges, the central bank's decision will play a pivotal role in shaping the nation's financial future. It remains to be seen how businesses and consumers manage high inflation and elevated interest rates. Laddie Williams, reporting for Channels Television News.
Expected, there's been reactions following the decision for economic think tank, the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises, that's CPPE. They welcomed the decision of the Monetary Policy Committee to pause the tightening of rates. In a statement that was released immediately afterwards, the Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Muda Yusuf, explained that hiking rate was really not an option, as there were concerns that both the cash reserve ratio and the monetary policy rate were already very high, which has created difficult financing conditions for investors in the real economy. However, Mr. Yusuf says fiscal and monetary policy coordination remains a critical imperative for macroeconomic stability. And still reacting to the decision of the MPC, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria say they are deeply concerned and worried about the continued decision of the central bank to maintain the monetary policy rate at 27.5% since November 2024, despite a global wave of interest rate reductions aimed at revitalizing economic productivity and combating stagflation. The body believes that when most progressive economies are charting a course towards industrial recovery and macroeconomic stability, Nigeria's monetary stance tends to lead in a different direction. Over the last quarter, they say countries such as members of the Euro area, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Australia, China, India, Thailand, even Ghana and Egypt have implemented interest rate cuts to foster economic growth and support productive sectors. At the heart of its successful implementation lies access to affordable financing to boost capacity utilization. Unfortunately, the current interest rate regime, they say, constrains finance costs for members, surging by over 44% from 1.43 trillion naira in 2023 to 2.06 trillion naira in 2024, and is still rising. And they say this represents a sharp increase that has directly depressed productivity and led to underutilization of industrial capacity. So, of course, the reaction will continue to follow that decision. But now let's talk a little bit about what we saw when we were talking about oil earlier today. We did see the plan by Israel to strike again is threatening oil supply and increasing prices. So while on the one hand, that might be positive for Nigeria because Nigeria is largely dependent on the sale of crude. So that means that revenue could increase if it's sustained because, it's This is the July contract that's at sale at this time. And it's about 2 months, I believe, of the contract. But if it continues to also be on a high, increasing trend, then we might expect a change in the price of pump for petrol especially. But Dangote had told us that as consumers, Nigerians shouldn't be worried because there would be stability in price. I don't know how they hope to do that, but I think we do have someone who can tell us a little bit about that. Mr. Dan Kunle is a business consultant and is right here in the studio. Mr. Kunle, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Madam Ini. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah. So in a deregulated environment, we expect prices to fluctuate depending on the movement of global crude price. But Dangote Refinery is assuring us there'll be price stability. How do they hope to attain that?
Yeah, yes, Madam. Morning and good morning to the audience globally. This issue is continuous. Nigeria is a political economy that is not normal with those international countries we are trying to relate with. Our situation has long been wrongly structured. The economic model we run in the last 40 years, let's say from independence, is the one that is causing all this disequilibrium you are seeing. Otherwise, can you see the contradiction? If the international price of crude oil is going up, you expect in a deregulated market, PMS, or all petroleum product derivatives supposed to go up also. But the contradiction you see here, which makes Nigeria an unusual economy, is that the scale that Dangote Refinery brought to the marketplace is giving him an advantage to reduce the price, even though the crude price internationally is going up. But having said that, he is doing that as a sacrifice, because he will have as well just relate the numbers in accordance with the international price. If crude oil is $65 per barrel, every day or every week, he also supposed to adjust the local price at his gantry in accordance with that trend. But in this case, he decided to remain stable. He does not want to escalate the price of PMS because of the overall effect on the domestic economy. It could be very
somebody
devastating.
Has to be paying for it because it means to be buying more. We know there's a contract, so the crude he's using today, he must have bought it a couple of months back. So we understand that time lag.
Yeah.
But somebody has to pay for it because he's a businessman. If he's paying more for the crude, then he has to make the money from a place.
That's good. You see the metric, Madam, you need to see the metric. The cargo he took in March, April are the cargoes that are crystallizing now in May. So the cargo he's going to take in May will crystallize sometimes in July. So if you see the matrix and how the Excel table works, you will see that it's very complex. That is why when I see Nigerians just saying, oh, the price of petrol is supposed to be so low, I will just laugh. If they know all the English that goes in there to make up the final unit price, they will see that only a very careful businessman like Aliko Dangote can work out that. Otherwise, if it remains government refinery, definitely they will be running at a loss. If it is just government refinery, they will be running at a loss, which means government will bond the losses, will bond the brunt. I hope you know what I mean by that, because you said somebody has to pay the price. Exactly. Yes, subsidy comes in. So if you allow a big refinery like Dangote to receive enough crude locally, if at all there is enough locally, because at the moment there is no enough crude locally, because our production...
But we heard you just got some crude recently.
No, yeah, this is part of the confusions. What is the volume that he got? So even if you need 650,000 barrels, maybe you get just 100,000 or 200,000. You are far away from the reality. So now, but not to miss the point, the issue is that because he has scale, so he can manage. He can manage and just be at equilibrium, not selling at a loss, but not making profit. So that is a big sacrifice for the country. And that is why we are trying to appreciate the listening ears of President Tinubu to allow this regime of Naira for crude to prevail for the time being.
That has been it has been reviewed and renewed.
And that's what I say it should prevail for the time being until the market is able to adjust at equilibrium level. So it's good that we are having this situation, but we must all realize that if the price of crude goes further, like you just mentioned now that Israel is threatening to create some escalations around the world again. So if the price of crude escalates in accordance with that crisis, then that means this price that you are enjoying today, it may again adjust a bit because of the situation. So these are the vagaries that makes it very difficult for this part of the world to just use the rule of the thumb that, oh, petrol will just, but we have enjoyed stability in the last 5 months. Not too erratic. You can predict that petrol is between 850 and maybe 1,000. Exactly 950.
Yeah, but you see, the conversations such as this actually also fuels the fear of monopoly. And, you know, there's a section of the economy that's afraid of the impact or possibility of monopoly in the petrol supply, distribution and production.
Whenever I hear from you media leaders that shape
the media only brings up
the
conversations
you trigger,
going on there.
Thank you. You trigger, and then you are continuing to flog this language wrongly. Monopoly. In which way has this situation that we find ourselves become a monopoly on the part of Dangote Refinery? Government owns 445,000 barrels of crude oil refining capacity across Warri, Port Harcourt, Kaduna. All these years, the same government through NNPC have been the one importing petrol and failed or refused to fix their refineries. Just take it. And then NNPC and the downstream regulatory authority, they have embarked on product importation all these years. So, and a private investor decided, I have repeated severally, decided to risk his money and his life to build a refinery of scale for 45,000 barrels against his new 650,000 barrels, madam. So if you have scale to put in the marketplace, suddenly they now say you are a monopolist. In which way are you a monopolist, madam? Did you hold government? Did you hold government not to fix their refinery? Madam, they even told us, they told us that the refineries were working. I have been shouting that show us how the refineries are working in Port Harcourt or Warri or Kaduna. So bring the products of this refinery to the marketplace to complement Dangote. But instead, they are importing. The import racketeering continue. So, and if they are importing low quality, the regulatory authority has no world-class laboratory to test the level of sulfur and impurity we are importing. So in which way has Dangote begin suddenly? Dangote Refinery suddenly is now a monopolist. In which way, madam? In any case, in any business that you have capacity more than your neighbor. He will say you are a monopolist. In which way? Is MTN a monopolist in Nigeria today? MTN and Airtel, are they monopolists? They bring scale to the marketplace. So I think we should play down on that language. Dangote Refinery is not a monopolist at all. And there is no tendency for that. He's brought in fact, the petrochemical complex now, when it comes, you will see the wonder. This country is just at the verge of industrialization. The country was at the verge of disindustrialization. So the refinery has come to crystallize that Nigeria can be industrialized. So I don't see why this threat of monopolies. I know it might have been fed into the media from from the cabal that
Well,
are
then the
importing
media just
petroleum
reflects and
products.
asks questions,
No,
you
it's,
know, of
yeah,
conversations
yeah,
going on. But
yeah,
what about the
yeah.
modular refineries? Aren't they making any impact? Are they not in the picture?
Yeah, madam, it's the same language again. INI is the same language. What is modular? Modular, go and check it in engineering. Mini refineries, better language, better qualification so that we don't confuse the country, the audience. The mini refineries, madam, they are small in technology. They are very small.
Are they useless?
No, they are not useless.
Okay,
But,
so where should we
but
channel them?
what they bring to the market is so
Are they
insignificant.
contributing in petrol?
Very, very
or
small.
do we say, okay, the modular refineries, for instance, should face some other products that they can easily feed into the ecosystem?
If, INI, let me give you a typical example if we have luxury of time. If you have 1,000 barrels a day mini refinery somewhere, and the cracker cannot do more than maybe naphtha and some diesel and some low power fuel and high power fuel. So it cannot produce petrol pumps. It cannot produce petrol that go to the pumping stations, to where you and me buy. So that is already out of it. So if you have aggregate all the mini refineries in Nigeria, and let's assume they do 20,000 barrels per day, and none of them produces PMS. So it's all diesel, small, within the area they operate. So having said that does not mean Aradel is coming up maybe in a year's time to produce PMS if they are able to get their configuration right. So, but they are not too, they are good, but not, they can't make critical mass impact. That is just the summary. Very small impact they are making, maybe 1-2% impact. We are talking here, madam, of about 35 to 40 million liters of petrol per day. So if somebody is doing just diesel only and naphtha, why are we capturing them to become so important in the conversation?
Well, I mean, if they're an existing factor, we need to at least recognize that they're there. But with the trend that we have in the country, and when we look at what's going on with crude, you know, in the global space, what's the picture that you see when you talk about Nigeria's petrol? Let's talk about PMS, because that's the most consumed. I know the diesel is also good for the, for the everyday man now. What do you see as the trend, talking about price stability and supply, the threat coming from Israel and Iran now, our crude for Naira, you know, availability of crude, which has always been in the news. What do you see as the trend for the country?
Madam, Ini, sorry I used the word madam because I'm just trying to be cautious. I'm very sorry. Ini, the international arena for crude, Nigeria, until we scale up to above 2 million barrels per day, before we can become a little bit more relevant.
Do you see us meeting that this year? That's a target for this
year. If the environment is allowed to support the new investors in Seplat, the new investors by Seplat and Renaissance, and some other new investors that are taking over new oil fields.
Yes. We have one Gombe and all that.
I don't want to talk much about Kolomani, Bauchi Kolomani oil field in this equation now. It's still too early to talk about that. We don't have the result. We don't know the level of investment and mobilization in Kolomani, and we don't know the exact reserve. So I am very scientific when I make statements. So I don't talk much about such probabilities. Those are what we call probabilities. Probable proven reserve, we don't know. And the investment that we go in there, and the facilities that we go in there, they are not issues of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. But what comes to the equation now are the huge assets that has just been taken over by Renaissance from Shell. Then equations like the 4 assets that has been taken over by Seplat. All this can help Nigeria in the next 6 months to 1 year to ramp up to above 2 million barrels per day. Definitely. But the government must support them to get the social license of all the communities in the Niger Delta area. so that there can be peace, there can be good understanding, for them to mobilize resources to bring out crude oil. So if this can happen, then you can now know that you have a good position to relate with the situation in the international arena. Because America, if the price of crude remain below 60, the shale and the baby drillers in America may be discouraged, because their cost of production is about $62.5 per barrel. So that is already a problem, and they will work out that macroeconomic situation there. Then if you go to the Middle East, where Saudi Arabia is sitting as the premier, they can afford to remain at 60, 62 in Saudi Arabia. So Nigeria can have a window. I believe the new management in NNPC should be able to help these new investors to ramp up production. Okay. But we, as I have said, we need social engagement from all the territories where crude is being proven and where facilities are already in existence.
All right, Mr. Dan Kunle, yeah, thank you so much for your views and perspective this morning.
Thank you very much, Ini. It's nice being here in your beautiful studio. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's take a break now. When we come back, we're talking digital payment. There are some barriers that has been as a big hurdle to the adoption, especially in the rural areas. We'll talk about that after this break here on Business Morning. Please stay with us.
It's
acceptance brought to you by Visa.
Yes, it's that time of the week when we discuss digital payment, and today we're looking at some barriers to that payment. And we found out that despite decades of digital transformation, many individuals and businesses, particularly in emerging markets, remain unable to fully participate in digital economy, especially in the rural parts of Nigeria. And we do know that we have larger informal markets here in Nigeria, so barriers to payment acceptance such as infrastructure, infrastructural gaps, security concerns, limited financial literacy seem to continue to constrain the growth of it. And despite fintech growth, digital payment adoption in the country still faces some barriers like cash preference, weak infrastructure, security concerns, and tackle these would need a digital finance to be unlocked to drive economic progress. And so we'll look at some of these barriers and perhaps get probable solutions to them. And to discuss this, we'll talk about fintech. We have the president of Fintech Association, so I'm sure you can answer all our questions this morning. He's also the chief executive officer of Zest Payment, Dr. Stanley Jacob. Dr. Jacob, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. So we've had a lot of attempts. I mean, we have even bodies and associations focusing on financial inclusion to ensure that the spread is accelerated. Not jumping the gun from your perspective, from where you stay as a president of Fintech Association, how good have we been when it comes to financial inclusion?
Wow, thank you, Ini, and I'll say it's a pleasure having to join you this morning to discuss a subject that is very critical to our economic future. I really want to start with that question around our successes. I feel that the stories around our digital payment success is grossly undertold. Because when you look at what the numbers are saying, you take electronic payments, for example, between 2019 and 2022, just 3 years space, we had about 300% growth in electronic payments, and that took us to over 380 trillion in payment. 2 years later, at the end of 2024, we did 3x that figure, and for the first time, we recorded payments exceeding 1 quadrillion in value.
I can tell you that many Nigerians never heard of those kind of figures before, in quadrillions. So it wasn't just a victory for payments, but also for our education and literacy. I got to hear that for the first time too. Secondly, when you look at cash, globally, Nigeria has recorded the steepest decline in cash usage across the world. We had about 59% decline in cash usage when you look at a 10-year span between 2014 and 2024. When you move to financial inclusion, a FINA report in 2023 says we are in 64% included, down from 56% included, as in terms of exclusion going down. It might look like a small delta, but when you look at it carefully in terms of the initiatives and execution, the impact is very huge. And looking forward, analysts project that the cumulative growth we would see between 2024 and 2029 is about 23%. So it's all positive. We don't have any country in Africa that have recorded this indicator. So I'm super proud of this.
But isn't that because of the base year? Should we really be proud? We're the giant of Africa, after all. Isn't it because of the issue of like the base year, where we're coming from? So if you look at a country like South Africa, I mean, they don't have such huge change because they have been there even before us.
Yeah, so I will not ever downplay the hurdles that are before us, especially because we're here to discuss hurdles today. We have a lot of challenges. And if you look at payments 15 years back and what it has been today, in terms of the pace of growth, the impact of the growth, and even the velocity and the data recorded, you will see that the impact is more. You would have seen more established markets, very little growth year on year, but we've seen exponential growth in this space. So looking at how we've been able to surmount some of the challenges we recorded, I don't think we can downplay our successes.
But we still have the issue of infrastructural gaps.
Yes.
Do you see intentionality in closing those gaps?
So talking about the infrastructural gap, today only about 40% of Nigerians have access to reliable internet connectivity. There's this thing about having a two-tiered financial system, urban and rural. So the experience for financial services or internet enjoyment in urban area is very different when you go to the rural areas. So it looks like a two-tiered system. So when you move towards the rural area, on a lighter note, it looks like a 2G or a 1G. That's a problem, and that's why I say we cannot downplay the hurdle. We've also seen progress in the fiber deployment, but a lot of inadequacies around the inland distribution to where the last mile should be. When you look at infrastructure still and you see ATMs, so that it's not just talking about internet, but there's also ATM as an infrastructure for financial services. Today we have just about 17,000 ATMs, and for our population, 60,000 is just the starting point. So we're still very far when you look at these things. And for us to surmount them, we definitely need some sort of strategic investments to expand, and we also will do with some public-private partnership. So yes, the challenges are there, and we need to also commend some of the recent initiatives of the Nigerian Communication Commissions and the Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, especially as it affects having to deploy broadband connectivity to the 774 local government. I'm very positive about it. I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping to see that when they carry the stakeholders along, it will give the desired impact.
Are they carrying the stakeholders along?
So, to some extent, I think they can still do better, because one thing we always don't do well is carrying the stakeholders along, especially when we have key initiatives like this. But I think they need to carry the stakeholders along, because even when you deploy some of these things, you find out some people say, you still find people in Nigeria say to you, oh, in my area, it's NTN that works. If you go here, it's this telco that works. So we need to carry stakeholders, because there's also that voice of the consumer, there's a voice of the operator. Everyone needs to tell you what will help them work. So you don't just put something and at the end of the day, you're not able to deliver the expected outcome that underlying infrastructure should produce.
And I'm glad you brought in the public sector. And the minister has been really active, at least we've seen him. We've seen also the efforts of ICT centers in communities. Yeah. So other than the hardware, which is the infrastructure itself, there's also the need for skills and knowledge and education, and we do hope to see that also make impact, because I mean, even if you had the infrastructure and people are not adopting it, then that's another thing. Yeah. Then that brings me to the issue of trust, that there are some Nigerians who still do not trust this system, and so adoption is difficult.
Okay, so thank you very much, Idia. That's a very valid point. There's a strong marriage between literacy and trust when it comes to payment. So first of all, there are just about 36% of adult Nigerians that are financially literate. That's quite low. So that also poses some challenge. And when you look at it, rural, urban demography, you find them mostly in one part of the country. There's another thing about adoption of financial services. Before now, you used to see a lot of complex user interfaces on mobile, online banking, and all that. People find it hard to use these interfaces. But we're seeing operators, banks, fintechs coming up with more interactive and intuitive interfaces, and not just now for transactions, but we're seeing more apps coming out for education. They educate users on what they want to do, the products, before they buy them. That's on that. But when you look at trust, cybersecurity threats, the growing sophistication remains there when you look at the financial service sectors. So we'll continue to be vulnerable because the fraudsters don't sleep. And when you look at it, I don't have that statistics, but a good number of Nigerians have been victims of fraud loss due to financial services. And this tends to impact their trust on the system. And there are a few factors that we can just quickly touch on when it comes to that. One is the chargeback fraud. So when we talk of trust, there is that part on the consumer, there is that part on the operator. They both have to trust each other, because even when you look at the consumer bit, we have consumers that dispute legitimate transaction. So that also creates a kind of gap in terms of trust both ways. There's the issue of data, leakage of personal information, card details, which of course a lot of education is handling, and also low reporting rates. So every time a financial institution reports fraud, there's a scare from the consumer. So that's where trust comes in. They need to be sure that they are safe whenever there is an incident reported. We also have that challenge in Nigeria today where a good number of operators don't like to report what they have faced. So what it does is that it exposes other operators to similar kind of attacks because the learnings learned are not shared. So we think that if we grow in trust and we grow in literacy, there will be a more safe and secure ecosystem for everyone.
And fintech, you guys do have a role to play in this, both for the consumers and for the players which you are part of, the communication and blurring the line or the divide. I mean, I think fintechs, they do have a whole lot to do.
Yes. As the president of the Fintech Association of Nigeria, I also sit as the vice president for the Africa Fintech Network for Western Africa. So what we're doing is about getting participation. We're bringing people. Part of what I've done in this administration with my team is to have what we call the communities of practice. So we bring the operators together into different communities of practice, regulatory alignment, cyber security, new technology. So we want people to be able to test and learn new technology. We want them to be able to share best practices on cybersecurity and also shared infrastructure. Because some of these things that we need to achieve compliance and take us to that place where we have a very safe ecosystem, some of the very tiny or smaller players might not be able to afford them. It becomes very complex and difficult for them. So we think that having those shared infrastructure in National Fraud Center, National Cybersecurity Infrastructure goes a long way. And we are pursuing these initiatives. We made a lot of progress in the past 8 months, actually.
All right, and we hope to see more progress.
Thank you, Ini.
All right, thank you so much. President, Fintech Association and Chief Executive Officer of Zest Payment, Dr. Stanley Jacob, for your time and views.
Thank you, Ini. My pleasure.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we head to the global scene here on Business Morning. Please stay with us.
Unlocking the future of digital payment. Value of acceptance, brought to you by Visa.
Welcome back. It's still Business Morning here on Channels Television. Let's head to the global space now with Will Ibon. Will, so yesterday, RCBN MPC held rates. We've heard news of a lot of cuts But I think more interesting one at this time is the UK cut rate.
You know.
And now the inflation is up.
Yes.
I wonder if there was a regret to that rate
Well,
cut.
I'm sure they will say maybe a little too soon, and right now they're probably not considering any cut anytime soon.
We know Ghana also experienced the same thing
Yeah,
some months
definitely.
ago. They cut rates, and then the next month they had a jump in their inflation. So no wonder in Nigeria we're not in a hurry to cut rates. We're not.
When Ladi asked yesterday if I see the CBN cutting rate, I said no, I'd probably say a hold year, because cutting rates is more like no, I don't think the CBN is going to take that
I
stand.
don't think we're there yet.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
Nothing to show for that. But let's quickly look at what the UK is saying. UK inflation jumped to 3.5% in April, its highest level in over a year, likely delaying for the Bank of England rate cuts. As I mentioned, the rise driven by the higher energy bills, council tax, and new payroll and vehicle duties exceeded analyst expectations. Now, core inflation also climbed to 3.8%. The bank recently cut rates to 4.25%, but its chief economist has since warned cuts may be coming too fast. Deutsche Bank now expects inflation to stay above 3% for the rest of the year before easing gradually in 2025. Still staying on the central bank, Sweden's central bank is keeping its monetary policy steady for now, calling it well-balanced. Deputy Governor Anna Sem says the Riksbank is waiting for more data before making any moves, especially on inflation and economic activity. She notes rising global uncertainty could weigh on Sweden's economy, though the impact on inflation remains unclear. The bank says it's ready to adjust rates if needed, but is staying cautious and data-driven for now. Let's move on now. The UK sportswear giant JD Sports says tariffs in the US could drive up prices and weaken demand. The retailer, which makes nearly 40% of its sales in the US, saw a 2% dip in the first quarter sales. It's already facing weaker demand for Nike products and tighter consumer spending. JD says it's diversifying suppliers to reduce tariff risks, but warns that higher prices may still hit consumer confidence. Despite short-term pressures, the company remains confident of delivering better returns over time. Etihad Airways posted a 30% jump in first quarter profit to 685 million dirhams. That's about $186 million. And this was driven by strong demand and better operational efficiency. Revenue rose 15% with passenger income up 16% to 5.5 billion dirhams thanks to more flights and an expanding network. Etihad CEO Antonio Neve says the company is proud to deliver a record-breaking quarter, both in profitability and in guest satisfaction. Elon Musk says AI may hit a power crunch by mid-2026 as data center demand soars. Its startup XAI is building a gigawatt-scale facility in Memphis about the size of a U.S. nuclear plant. It warns electricity will become the next big bottleneck after chips and transformers. Google raised similar concerns in February, turning to nuclear options after renewables proved unstable. Musk says China's power expansion looks like a rocket, while the U.S. remains flat. XAI's use of gas turbines have sparked environmental concerns over Clean Energy Act violations. Utilities report strong data center demand, but Constellation Energy warns some projections may be overstated. Now let's see, President Trump has hit a roadblock on Capitol Hill after failing to win over key Republican lawmakers from high-tax blue states. At the center of the dispute is a SALT deduction, a contentious tax break for states and local taxes, with the SALT caucus standing firm. What does this mean for Trump's tax bill and GOP unity ahead of 2026? We are joined by Washington correspondent Maria Bird to break it down. Good morning, Maria. It's good to have you on the show.
Good morning.
Maria, let's start with the basics. What exactly is a SALT deduction, and why is it such a politically explosive issue, especially for Republicans in the blue states?
Well, as we all know, the president came in campaigning for very specific items, and specifically, he spent quite a bit of time addressing the American people and promising the American people that there would be tax breaks. And not only tax breaks, but this meant more dollars in Americans' pockets. And so, because of that, when you look at this bill that he's been trying to put forth, and he went up the Capitol Hill on Tuesday, it's really about state and local taxes, as you mentioned. State and local taxes are a huge part of the economic fund base in the United States. So states use these taxes to be able to ensure the efficient operations of the government. And so when you look at the SALT caucus and their focus on state and local taxes and this cap that has been put in place of $10,000 for deductions. As we all know, tax time in the US is a very busy, stressful time for many Americans. And so when you talk about removing the cap from $10,000 a year at this time for state and local tax deductions to $30,000 a year, that means a lot for Americans who are looking to add more dollars in their pocket. The challenge, though, that many lawmakers are expressing is the fact that there is still a deficit within the U.S. budget. And the concern is that tax cuts then allow for greater deepening of that hole that we oftentimes have in our budget. And so they don't see where they're able to ensure that we can have the money that's needed to operate the government, that we're able to, we know that we've all been through some very strenuous economic times. Obviously, the government has taken a major hit trying to support individuals post-COVID and through some of the other economic challenges that the U.S. has experienced. And so the deficit and the government's budget, I think, is the greatest concern for many lawmakers, which does not lean them to wanting to raise this tax cap by $20,000.
Yeah, it's quite a lot to consider there. $40,000 now. I'm thinking naira. It's $40,000 cap there. That's a lot. I'm sure a lot of lawmakers, especially the Republicans, aren't sitting too well with it. But how much room is there for a compromise before this bill stalls, say, completely?
Well, the president was hopeful to get this approved before the Memorial Day weekend. We are now at Wednesday. Memorial Day is Monday. So lawmakers really only have about a day and 2 days. Friday, typically, it's not a day where they do a lot of voting. And so what can happen between today and tomorrow? I'm not sure. I think the president doesn't believe at this point that there is much that can be done. But as we've seen before, things can turn around very quickly in the U.S., especially this new administration. But that is the hope, is that it would have been approved before Memorial Day weekend. Now, once we get past the Memorial Day weekend and what happens next week, I'm not quite sure. But the plan was for it to be approved then because of all of the other pieces that went to this bill. This bill was really about balancing the budget, and obviously this tax cap challenge or component was added into that bill as well.
Okay, so let's just step back a bit. What are the broader implications of this, looking at economic aspects, especially for Trump going to 2026? What would this mean for Trump if this lingers and there's no way ahead? What do you see this? How do you see this impacting the economy and Trump's chances?
Well, we've got to get a balanced budget approved. So that's the number one challenge, is approving the budget. And so that's number one on the list. The tax cut issue is really going to impact his voter base. They were hopeful to see a raise in the tax in the cap for these taxes. They're obviously looking for tax breaks. The tax break would have phased out at incomes of around $400,000, and so individuals that were in that high net earning area would not be eligible for this tax cut. And so this is really addressing Americans that potentially could be seeing drastic challenges right now economically. But again, we also know this could also put a challenge to some of the programs that the government's able to put forth to address some of the greater challenges of those who might not even be in the realm of being able to take advantage of a tax cut of $30,000. And so it's a great challenge. We know that many blue states where they're trying to meet the needs of a vast group of individuals, not just the wealthy, but they're also trying to meet the needs of those individuals who are still dependent upon programming and dollars that will allow them, especially when you talk about times where we have seen drastic cuts in jobs. And so many programs that allow people to get back into the job market, upskill individuals, could be impacted if we're not able to obviously have the type of budget that allows for some of these programs to function within the government.
We hope it doesn't derail entirely the tax bill itself. But Trump told the salt caucus to let it go. That's in his words. But they're still holding firm. How significant is this standoff between the GOP, within the GOP, and what does it tell us about the fractures in the party ahead into the next election cycle?
Well, as we know, the president has a lot of irons on the table at this time, and so when we talk about the challenges around tariffs, when you talk about obviously this tax piece, when you talk about balancing the budget, I mean, there's just so many components, and obviously we know he went in the door on day one, very active with executive orders. We also still have immigration challenges that exist, so there's a lot of things that he's been working to address, and obviously the efficiencies within the government, which have led to many layoffs. And so there are individuals that are now out of work that need to be moved into other industries. And so there's a lot of efforts that he has to take into consideration. So when you mentioned, he said, let it go, some of that is trying to be strategic about where the priorities exist for the U.S. at this time, knowing that we are continuing to see slight inflation. Some of the reports, earnings reports coming out of various companies are not where he would quite want them to be. There still has not been solid tariff deals on the table. And so making sure that we can move forward with some solid tariff deals without much distraction. So there's just so many things that are currently within the framework of what he's trying to move forward, that this might be one that he's saying, if we're not going to get it done by Memorial Day, let's refocus.
Definitely, Trump and his group need to refocus. Thank you so much, Maria Bird, our correspondent in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So it appears to be like Trump is not having it, you know, is it dandy within the group when it comes to taxes? I think this is what divides them. That's what probably makes them different. Now they have differences. Now something that concerns their constituents, they're fighting for their constituency. They don't want, regardless of the fact that they want Trump in power, they don't want anything to affect their constituency. So
yeah,
I see
well,
this as
I guess, it's beyond politics, looking at
yes.
the welfare and the wishes of the people. That's what's happening with the GOP and all of that. And it's tax reform in Nigeria. It's tax reform in America,
yes.
because the government needs to raise revenue.
Definitely.
And of course, tax comes top on the list.
Of course.
All right, Will, that'll be later for you for Business Incorporated. And that's the much we can do on Business Morning today. Thank you so much for being a part of the program, and I do hope it was worth your time. At 1 p.m., Ladi Williams and Will Ibon will be back to take you around the world of business and economies around the world. That'll be also about 55 minutes, so you can join them. I'm Amy John McQuarrie. Do have a great day.